She found a letter on Halloween night, addressed to her grandmother, dated 1953, from a man who died 70 years ago. For 20 years, lights burned in an empty house. No one lived there, but someone was waiting. Someone who made a promise. In the next 30 minutes, you'll discover what happens when a love refuses to die. If you make it to the end without tears, leave a comment. And if you love stories with heart, stories that matter, subscribe. Welcome to our community. This is The Light in the Empty House. Let's begin. For 20 years, the Miller house stood empty. 20 years of springs when forsythia bloomed yellow along the fence. 20 years of summers when the grass grew wild and tall. 20 years of winters when snow buried the porch steps. But every October 31st, something changed. The house that stood dark and silent for 364 days would awaken. Lights would appear inside. Not all at once. Never all at once. Slowly, deliberately. As if someone were moving through the rooms with purpose. First, the downstairs windows would glow. A soft amber light, warm against the October darkness. Then, an hour later, the second floor. Room by room, the windows would come alive. And always, just before midnight, the attic window would illuminate. A pale, steady light that never flickered. A light that would burn until the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky. No one knew who turned on those lights. No one had ever seen anyone enter. No one had ever seen anyone leave. The real estate agent who handled the property said the power had been shut off decades ago. The neighbors whispered that it was impossible. The children dared each other to knock on the door. But none ever did. And so, over the years, an unspoken rule settled over Maple Street like morning frost. Never go to the Miller house on Halloween. The town of Millbrook was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Where people left their doors unlocked. Where children rode bikes until dark without worry. Maple Street was the oldest street in town. Oak trees lined both sides, their branches forming a canopy overhead. In autumn, those branches blazed with red and gold. Leaves crunched underfoot. The air smelled of wood smoke and cider. It was the kind of street where families put down roots, where generations grew up in the same houses, where mailboxes bore the same names for 50 years. Margaret Davies had lived on Maple Street for half a century. Number 42, a modest two-story colonial with blue shutters, 3 houses down from the Miller house, close enough to see, too close to forget. She had moved there as a young bride in 1958, raised her daughter there, watched her daughter marry and move away, buried her husband there, 15 years ago. Now, at 72, Margaret lived alone. Her hair had gone silver. Her hands trembled slightly when she held her coffee cup. But her mind was sharp. And her memory was too sharp. Too full of things she wished she could forget. This particular Halloween evening, Margaret sat in her living room. The same room where she'd celebrated 50 Christmases. The same room where she'd held her daughter as a baby. The same room where her husband had taken his last breath. A bowl of candy sat on the table beside her. Fun-sized chocolate bars and lollipops, though fewer children came each year. The neighborhood had changed. Young families moved in and out. The kids grew up so fast now. Too old for trick-or-treating by middle school. But Margaret kept the tradition. She always bought candy. She always turned on the porch light. She always waited. Outside, the sun was setting. The sky turned from blue to purple to deep indigo. Jack-o'-lanterns glowed on porches up and down the street. Plastic skeletons danced in the wind. Inflatable ghosts bobbed on front lawns. The doorbell rang. Margaret's face brightened. She knew that ring. That particular enthusiastic double press. "Grandma, it's me." The door burst open. Emma swept in like a small hurricane. 16 years old, all energy and life. Dark hair wild beneath a crooked witch's hat. Black dress, striped stockings, too much eyeliner. "Mom said you shouldn't be alone on Halloween," Emma announced, dropping her backpack by the door. "So I'm here to help hand out candy." Margaret felt her heart lift. Emma was the light of her life, her only grandchild. So much like Margaret had been at that age. Curious, fearless, full of questions. "You didn't have to come, sweetheart," Margaret said. Though she was deeply grateful. "Are you kidding? This is way better than the lame party Sophia's having." Emma flopped onto the sofa. "Besides, I love your house on Halloween. It's cozy." They settled in. Margaret in her armchair by the window. Emma on the sofa, phone in hand, but present. Really present, in a way teenagers rarely were. The doorbell rang again. A tiny vampire and a smaller princess. Emma handed out candy with dramatic flair, making the children giggle. The evening wore on. More trick-or-treaters came and went. A parade of superheroes and monsters, of ghosts and witches and characters from movies Margaret didn't recognize. Each time, Emma jumped up to answer the door. Each time, she came back grinning. "That kid was so cute. Did you see that costume?" Margaret watched her granddaughter and smiled. This was good. This was right. Having Emma here, filling the house with life. But as the sky deepened from purple to black, as the crowds of children thinned, Margaret's gaze kept drifting. An hour later, Emma left her grandmother's house. She'd promised to meet her friends. "Just for a little while," she'd said. "Just to walk around the neighborhood." Margaret had nodded, relieved. Relieved that Emma was going. Relieved that she wouldn't ask more questions. Not tonight. Emma stepped out into the October night. The air was crisp and cold. Her breath formed small clouds. The wind carried the scent of fallen leaves and smoke from chimneys. Down the street, she could see them waiting. Sophia, her best friend since 3rd grade. Jake, tall and awkward, always trying too hard to be funny. Marcus, quiet and thoughtful, camera always in hand. Finally, Sophia called out. She was dressed as a cat, complete with drawn-on whiskers. "We thought you'd ditched us for grandma duty." "Never," Emma grinned. But she needed company. "You know how she gets on Halloween." They started walking. The 4 of them, too old for trick-or-treating, but not ready to give up the night entirely. This was what they did now. Walked the streets. talked about everything and nothing, watched the little kids in their costumes, pretended they didn't miss being that age. Maple Street was alive with Halloween. Every house glowed with porch lights. Jack-o'-lanterns flickered on steps. Inflatable decorations swayed in the wind. Little witches and superheroes ran from house to house. Parents trailed behind with flashlights. Someone had set up a fog machine. Fake spider webs stretched across bushes. It was perfect. The kind of Halloween night you see in movies. But as they walked toward the end of Maple Street, the atmosphere changed. The houses grew darker. Fewer porch lights. Fewer decorations. The laughter of children faded behind them. And there, at the very end, stood the Miller house. Emma had seen it 1,000 times, passed it on her bike as a kid, walked past it on her way to school. But she'd never really looked at it. Not like this. Not on Halloween night. The house was old. Victorian style, 3 stories tall. White paint peeling in long strips. Shutters hanging crooked. The porch sagging under the weight of decades. The yard was overgrown. Weeds choked what had once been a garden. An old oak tree stood in front, gnarled and ancient. Its branches reached toward the house like skeletal fingers. But tonight, the house wasn't dark. Every window blazed with light. Warm, golden light that poured out into the darkness. The effect was startling. Beautiful and terrible at once. Like a lighthouse. Like a beacon. Like something calling out across time. Sophia grabbed Emma's arm. "Why is it so lit up?" she whispered. "I thought no one lived there." "No one does," Jake said. His usual joking tone was gone. "My dad says it's been empty since before we were born." Marcus raised his camera, took a photo. The flash briefly illuminated the yard. "My mom says weird things happen there," he said quietly. "Says we should never go near it." They stood there. 4 teenagers trying to look brave, trying to pretend they weren't affected. But Emma could feel it. The pull of the house, the mystery of it. "I dare you to knock on the door," Jake said suddenly. He was grinning, but his voice shook slightly. No one moved. No one laughed. The dare hung in the air. "Come on," Jake pressed. "Just walk up and knock." "Easy. You do it," Sophia shot back. "I would, but..." Jake picked up a tennis ball from the street. "Someone's dog toy, probably. How about this? I'll throw this at the porch. If it bounces back, we leave. If it doesn't, someone has to go get it." "That's stupid," Emma said. But her heart was racing. Jake didn't wait for permission. He wound up and threw. The ball sailed through the air. Over the low iron fence, across the overgrown yard. It hit the porch steps, bounced once, twice, and rolled to a stop near the front door. They all stared. "Oops," Marcus said. No one laughed. The ball sat there, white against the dark wood of the porch. Waiting. "Well," Jake said, his voice too loud. "Someone's gotta get it. That's my little brother's ball." "Liar," Sophia muttered. They looked at each other. 4 friends. 4 people who all suddenly found reasons not to move. Emma felt something stirring in her chest. The same curiosity she'd felt watching her grandmother, the same pull she'd felt when she saw those lights turn on. "I'll get it," she heard herself say. "Emma, no." Sophia grabbed her arm. "It's just a yard," Emma said, though her voice didn't sound as confident as she wanted. "It's just a house. I'll be 30 seconds." She stepped forward before she could change her mind. The gate creaked as she pushed it open. The sound was loud in the quiet street. Her friends stayed frozen at the sidewalk. Emma walked up the path. Each step felt heavier than the last. The house loomed above her, bigger than it looked from the street. The windows like eyes, watching, waiting. The air grew colder. Or maybe that was just her imagination. Her breath came faster. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She reached the porch steps, 3 wooden stairs, worn smooth by time. She climbed them carefully. The wood groaned under her weight. The tennis ball was right there. She bent down, grabbed it, and that's when she saw it. On the top step, partially hidden in shadow, a small paper bag. Emma froze, her hand still on the tennis ball. Her eyes fixed on the bag. It was old, the kind you see in antique shops. Brown paper, yellowed with age. The top folded over twice. She glanced back at her friends. They were gesturing frantically, mouthing words she couldn't hear. Probably telling her to leave, to come back. But Emma reached out. Her fingers touched the bag. It crinkled under her hand. She opened it. Inside were candies. Old-fashioned candies. The kind her grandmother kept in a dish on her coffee table. Strawberry bonbons in twisted wax paper. Peppermint sticks in cellophane that had gone cloudy with age. Root beer barrels in brown wrapping. Lemon drops in yellow. These weren't just old-style candies. These were old candies. Decades old. Emma's hands trembled as she looked closer. And that's when she saw what was beneath them. An envelope. Yellowed with time. The edges brown and brittle. A stamp in the corner, 3 cents. 3 cents. When was the last time stamps cost 3 cents? She lifted it carefully. Turned it over. Written on the front, in careful, faded handwriting. Margaret Sullivan. Emma's breath stopped. Sullivan. That was her grandmother's maiden name. Before she married Grandpa. Before she became Margaret Davies. Emma's mind raced. Her grandmother had lived on this street for 50 years. But Sullivan, that meant this letter was older. Much older. The postmark was smudged. But she could just make out October 31st, 195. The last digit was illegible. 1950s. This letter had been here for 70 years. Emma looked up at the house, at the glowing windows, at the door, dark and imposing. And then she saw it. In the second-floor window. A shadow. A figure. Tall and still. Looking down at her. Emma's blood turned to ice. She couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't scream. The figure didn't move either. Just stood there. Watching. Emma. Sophia's voice shattered the moment. Emma gasped. Shoved the envelope inside her jacket. Grabbed the tennis ball. And ran. She ran down the porch steps. Down the path. Through the gate. She didn't stop running until she was back with her friends, until the Miller house was behind her. What the hell? Jake grabbed her shoulders. Are you okay? You looked like you saw a ghost. Emma couldn't speak. Her chest heaved. The envelope pressed against her ribs, hot, burning, as if it were alive. I'm fine, she managed. Her voice didn't sound like her own. I'm fine. I need to go. Emma, I have to get back to my grandma's. She didn't wait for them to argue. She walked quickly back down Maple Street. Past the jack-o'-lanterns, past the laughing children, past the normal houses with their normal families. Her mind spun. The envelope. Her grandmother's name. The figure in the window. The lights. What was happening? She let herself back into her grandmother's house. The porch light was still on. The bowl of candy nearly empty now. The evening winding down. Margaret was asleep in her armchair. The TV played softly, some old movie in black and white. Emma stood in the doorway, watching her grandmother. Margaret looked small, fragile, her silver hair catching the lamplight. Her hands folded in her lap. Emma thought about waking her. About showing her the letter. About asking all the questions burning in her mind. But something stopped her. The peaceful look on her grandmother's face, the way her chest rose and fell evenly, the decades of secrets that letter might contain. Emma tiptoed past, down the hall to the guest room where she always stayed. She closed the door softly, sat on the bed. The envelope was warm. From her body heat, she told herself, just body heat. Nothing else. She turned on the bedside lamp. Stared at the envelope in the golden light. Her grandmother's name. Written in handwriting she didn't recognize. A letter that had waited 70 years. Emma's hands shook as she slid her finger under the flap. The seal broke with a soft tearing sound. She unfolded the letter carefully. The paper was thin, fragile. The ink had faded to brown. At the top, October 31, 1953. Emma began to read, and the room around her seemed to fade away. The letter was written in careful script. Each letter formed with precision. The kind of handwriting they don't teach anymore. The kind that takes time. Intention. Emma's eyes traced the words slowly. My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, then I have kept my promise, even if I could not keep it the way I hoped. Emma's throat tightened. She read on. Tonight is Halloween, and I should be there with you. Under the oak tree where we carved our initials, where I promised you forever. But war does not care about promises. War does not care about Halloween nights or young love or futures. We planned in whispered words. Emma paused. War. Which war? She looked at the date again. 1953. Korea, she realized. The Korean War. I am writing this from a place so far from home that I can barely remember what home feels like. All I can see is your face. All I can remember is that last Halloween. When I gave you the key and told you it would open our future. A key. What key? I do not know if I will make it home, Margaret. The truth is heavy on my chest tonight. Heavier than this uniform. Heavier than the rifle in my hands. So I am writing this, and I am asking my brother Robert to keep it safe. To give it to you if I do not return. Emma's hands trembled. She already knew how this story ended. The letter had never been delivered. Not in 1953. Not ever. Until tonight. If you're reading this, it means I did not make it back for our Halloween. It means the future we planned will not be the one you live. And Margaret, my darling Margaret, I need you to know that this is okay. I need you to live. I need you to be happy. I need you to find love again. To have children. To fill your life with all the joy we dreamed of together. Do not wait for me. Do not let my memory be a ghost that haunts you. Live, Margaret. Live fully and completely. And know that wherever I am at peace because I loved you. And I was loved by you. Emma wiped her eyes. Tears had started falling without her realizing. She took a shaky breath and continued. But if you ever wonder, if you ever want to feel close to me again, go to my house on Halloween night. Use the key I gave you. In the attic, I have left something for you. Something I built with my own hands. Something that will always be yours. Forever yours, even in absence. James Miller. Emma read the letter 3 times. Each time, the words hit harder. Each time, she understood more. Her grandmother had loved someone before Grandpa Thomas. Someone who went to war and never came home. Someone who had loved her enough to let her go. Someone named James Miller. Miller. The Miller house. Emma's mind connected the pieces. James Miller had lived in that house, had loved her grandmother there, had promised her something, had built her something in the attic. And somehow, 70 years later, that house still lit up every Halloween. Still waited. But for whom? James was dead. He had to be. The letter made that clear. So who turned on the lights? Who left the candy on the porch? Who put this letter there? Emma stood up. She needed to see those old photographs, the ones her mother had mentioned. The boxes of family history stored in the guest room closet. She opened the closet door. Pulled down box after box, Christmas ornaments, old linens, books. Finally, at the back, a shoebox labeled simply, Margaret 1950s. Emma's heart raced as she opened it. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Black and white mostly. Some color, faded to pastels. She flipped through them carefully. Margaret at graduation, young and glowing. Margaret with girlfriends at the beach. Margaret in a sundress, laughing. And then, Emma stopped. A photograph of her grandmother, young, maybe 18 or 19. Her dark hair shining. Her smile radiant. Wearing a cardigan and a skirt that came to mid-calf. And beside her, his arm around her shoulders, stood a young man. He was tall. Handsome in that old-fashioned way. Dark hair combed back. Kind eyes. A gentle smile. Wearing a military uniform. They stood in front of a house. Emma recognized it immediately. The porch. The columns. The oak tree beside it. The Miller house. But pristine. Fresh paint. Manicured garden. Beautiful. Emma turned the photograph over. Written on the back, in her grandmother's younger handwriting. Halloween 1952. Our promise. 1952. 1 year before the letter. 1 year before James went to war. Emma stared at the photograph. At the young couple so obviously in love. At the future they thought they had. At the promise they'd made. She thought about her grandmother downstairs, asleep in her chair, 72 years old, alone. Had she ever stopped loving him? Had she thought about him every Halloween? Had she watched those lights turn on year after year, knowing what they meant, but too afraid to go? Emma looked at the letter again. At the line, "Use the key I gave you." Did her grandmother still have it? After all these years? She had to find out. Emma gathered the letter and the photograph. She'd show them to her grandmother. She'd ask all the questions. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Emma?" Her grandmother's voice. Quiet. Strained. "Are you awake?" Emma's heart stopped. She looked at the letter in her hands, the photograph, the open shoebox. No time to hide them. No time to pretend. The door opened slowly. Margaret stood in the doorway, still in her cardigan and slacks, her silver hair slightly mussed from sleep. But her eyes were wide, alert, afraid. Those eyes fell to the envelope in Emma's hands, to her own maiden name written in faded ink, to the photograph on the bed. Margaret's face went through a series of emotions: shock, recognition, pain, and then something that looked like surrender. She didn't speak, didn't move. Emma held up the envelope. "Grandma," she said softly, "I found this at the Miller house." Margaret's hand went to her chest. Her legs seemed to give way slightly. She grabbed the doorframe for support. "Did you go to that house?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but there was no anger in it. Only fear. Only grief that had been buried for 70 years. Emma nodded. "The letter was on the porch," she said. "With old candy. Like someone left it there. Tonight." Margaret closed her eyes. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She opened her eyes, looked at Emma, looked at the letter, at the photograph of her younger self, at the evidence of a past she'd kept locked away. "I suppose," she said, her voice breaking, "it's time you knew the truth." She walked into the room, moved slowly, as if her bones ached, sat down heavily on the bed beside Emma. She picked up the envelope with shaking hands, stared at her own name, at handwriting she hadn't seen in 70 years, and Margaret began to cry. Not quietly, not the delicate tears of an old woman, but deep, wrenching sobs, the kind that come from a place that's been locked away for too long, the kind that hurt to release. Emma put her arms around her grandmother, held her tight, let her cry. They sat like that for a long time. The letter between them, the photograph face up on the bed. The past finally breaking into the present. When Margaret's tears slowed, when she'd cried herself almost dry, she looked at Emma. Her granddaughter's face was wet too, crying for a pain she didn't fully understand, for a love story that had ended before Emma's mother was even born. Margaret wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. "His name was James," she whispered. Emma squeezed her hand. "Tell me," she said gently. "Tell me everything." Margaret took a shaky breath. She looked at the photograph, at the young woman she'd been, at the young man who'd loved her. And after 70 years of silence, she began to speak. Margaret's voice was soft at first, barely more than a whisper, as if the words might shatter if spoken too loudly. "I met him in the summer of 1951, she began. "I was 18 years old. Just graduated from high school. The whole world felt open, possible." She paused. Her fingers traced the edge of the photograph. "My parents owned the bakery on Main Street. Sullivan's Bakery. I worked there every morning. 5 a.m. to noon. Mixing dough. Serving customers. Learning the business." Emma listened without interrupting. She could see her grandmother wasn't really in this room anymore. She was somewhere else. Somewhere long ago. "He came in one Tuesday in June. I remember because it was raining. A summer storm. The kind that comes suddenly and leaves everything smelling like earth." Margaret smiled faintly. "He stood in the doorway, dripping wet. Tall and shy. With the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. He asked for a loaf of bread. White bread, sliced. I wrapped it for him. Our hands touched when I gave him his change, and I swear, Emma, I felt something like lightning, but gentler, like recognition." She shook her head at her own memory. "The next day, he came back. Said he needed more bread. His mother sent him, he said. The day after that, he came again. And again. By the end of the week, my father was joking that the Miller family must eat a lot of bread." Emma smiled despite her tears. "His name was James Miller, 20 years old, home for the summer from college. Studying business, preparing to take over his father's lumber mill. The Miller family was well known in town, respected, successful." Margaret's smile faded. "But James wasn't like that. Wasn't interested in status or money. He wanted to be an architect. He loved buildings, structures. He'd spend hours sketching designs, imagining homes for families, spaces filled with light and warmth." She looked at Emma. "He made me feel like I mattered. Like everything I said was important. Like my dreams were as valid as his." We'd talk for hours. About everything. About nothing. About the future we wanted. By July, we were inseparable, Margaret continued. He'd pick me up after my shift at the bakery. We'd drive out to the lake. Or walk through town. Or sit on his front porch and just talk. She picked up the photograph, studied it closely. His family's house was beautiful. This house. The Miller house. 3 stories, Victorian style. His grandfather built it in 1890. James loved that house. He was always fixing something, repainting, repairing. He had plans to modernize it while keeping its character. Margaret's voice grew stronger, more animated, as if the memories were giving her energy. "That summer was the happiest of my life. We'd go to the Saturday night dances at the community center. He was a terrible dancer, but he tried. We'd get ice cream at Murphy's drugstore. We'd sit under the stars and name constellations we made up." She laughed softly. "By August, I knew. I knew I wanted to spend my life with him. And I could tell he felt the same. The way he looked at me. The way he held my hand. The way he talked about the future. Always including me in it." Her expression clouded. "But then September came. He had to go back to college, 2 more years to finish his degree. We promised we'd write every day. That he'd come home every chance he got. That we'd make it work. Margaret set down the photograph. He kept that promise. Letters every single day. Sometimes 2 letters. Visits every other weekend. He even came home for a weekend in October. Just because he missed me. She paused. Took a breath. That's when he told me about Halloween. He said Halloween was his favorite night of the year. Not because of candy or costumes, but because it felt magical. Like anything could happen. Like the veil between dreams and reality was thinner. Emma leaned closer. So we made Halloween our night. October 31st, 1951. Our first Halloween together. He took me to the town carnival. Won me a stuffed bear at the ring toss. Bought me caramel apples. We rode the Ferris wheel at midnight. Margaret smiled at the memory. When he walked me home. We took the long way. Past his house. We stood under the oak tree in his front yard. He pulled out his pocket knife. And carved our initials into the bark. MS plus JM. Forever. She looked at Emma. That's when he told me. After graduation, after college. His father was going to give him the house. James could start his architecture practice. We could get married. We could build our life there. Margaret's voice dropped. He said he was already preparing, fixing up the attic, turning it into something special. A surprise for me. He wouldn't tell me what it was, only that it was a promise of our future together. By Halloween 1952, Margaret continued. We'd been together for over a year. James was in his senior year. Graduation was only months away. We were planning our wedding. Summer of 1954, we'd decided. A small ceremony. Just family and close friends. She picked up the photograph again. This picture, she said, pointing. Halloween 1952. James came home that weekend. He was so excited. Said he had something to give me. Margaret's hand went to her throat. As if she could still feel something there. We stood right there. In front of his house. Under that oak tree. And he pulled out a small box from his pocket. Emma held her breath. I thought it was a ring, Margaret whispered. For a moment, my heart stopped. But when he opened the box, it was a key. An old-fashioned skeleton key. Brass, ornate, beautiful. She closed her eyes. He said, "This is my promise to you. This key opens our future. When I graduate, when we marry, I'll show you what I've been building. Until then, keep this close to your heart. And know that I'm building our forever." A tear slid down Margaret's cheek. I wore it on a chain around my neck. Every single day. It was my most precious possession. Not a ring, but something better. A promise. A future. She opened her eyes. Looked at Emma. That was our last happy Halloween. Margaret's voice grew quieter. Heavier. In January 1953, James got his draft notice. The Korean War was escalating. They needed more soldiers. James was young, healthy, educated. Of course they wanted him. She wrapped her arms around herself. We were devastated. But James tried to stay positive. Said it would only be a year. Maybe less. The war would end. He'd come home. We'd get married. Everything would be fine. Margaret shook her head. I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But I was terrified. Every day the newspaper had lists of casualties. Boys from our county. Boys we'd gone to school with. Boys who weren't coming home. She took a shaky breath. James shipped out in August 1953. Right after his 21st birthday. I went to the bus station to see him off. He was in his uniform. Trying to look brave. Trying to smile for me. Margaret's voice broke. He held me and whispered. Wait for me. This Halloween, I'll be home. We'll stand under that oak tree again. And I'll finally show you what I've been building. The war will be over. Our life will begin. I promise. She wiped her eyes. That was the last time I saw him. The last time I touched him. The last time I heard his voice. Emma squeezed her grandmother's hand. His letters came regularly at first, Margaret continued. Every few days. Full of love and hope and plans for the future. He talked about the house, about the attic room, about our wedding, about the children we'd have, the life we'd live. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper, but in October, the letters slowed. Then stopped. The last one I received was dated October 15, 1953. He wrote that his unit was being sent somewhere dangerous, that communication might be difficult. But he promised he'd write the moment he could. That nothing, not even a war, could keep him from me. Margaret looked at Emma with eyes full of old pain. Halloween 1953 arrived. I wore my best dress, the blue one James loved. I put on lipstick, fixed my hair. I put the key on its chain around my neck. And I walked to his house. Her hands trembled in her lap. I stood under that oak tree, right where we'd carved our initials, and I waited. I waited as the sun set. I waited as children came and went in their costumes. I waited as the air grew cold. I waited as the hours passed. I waited until midnight. Until every light on Maple Street had gone dark. Until I was standing alone in the darkness, clutching a key to a future that would never exist. Margaret's voice was hollow now. Empty. James never came. 3 days later, November 2nd. The telegram arrived. Private James Miller. Killed in action. October 29, 1953. 2 days before Halloween. The room was silent. Emma's tears fell freely now. Margaret sat perfectly still, as if all the emotion had been wrung out of her. I was 19 years old, she whispered. And my life was over. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Gathering herself. Gathering the strength to continue. After the telegram, she finally said, I couldn't function. Couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake at night, replaying every conversation, every moment, wondering if I'd told him enough. If he'd known how much I loved him. She stared at her hands. His family was kind to me. His parents, Robert and Elizabeth Miller. They invited me to the funeral. Sat me with the family. As if I already belonged to them. As if James and I had already been married. Margaret's voice caught. His older brother, Bobby Robert Jr. He was especially gentle with me. He understood. He'd seen how much James loved me. How much we'd meant to each other. She paused. After the funeral, I couldn't walk down Maple Street anymore. Couldn't look at that house. Couldn't bear the sight of the oak tree with our initials. Every reminder was a knife in my heart. Emma waited. Let her grandmother take her time. For months, I was a ghost, Margaret continued. Moving through life but not living it. My parents were worried. My friends didn't know what to say. Everyone told me I was young. That I'd heal. That time would help. But all I could think was, how do you heal from losing your future? She looked at Emma. Eventually, I had to make a choice. Stay frozen in 1953 forever. Or try to move forward. Margaret's expression hardened slightly. With determination. With survival. So I went to business school. Got a job at the town library. Threw myself into work. Into routine. Into anything that kept my mind occupied. She stood up slowly. Walked to the window. Looked out at the dark street. I kept the key, though. Always. In a box in my drawer. I couldn't bring myself to go to that house. Couldn't use it. But I couldn't throw it away either. In 1957, Margaret said, I met Thomas Davies, your grandfather. He was a teacher at the high school. Quiet, kind, patient. He knew about James. Everyone in town did. But he never pushed. Never tried to replace him. He just was there. Her voice was softer now. I didn't love him the way I loved James. Not at first. Maybe not ever, in that same consuming way. But I cared for him deeply. He was good to me. He understood I carried ghosts. She turned back to Emma. We married in 1958. Bought this house. 3 doors down from the Miller house. Thomas said it didn't bother him. That the past was the past. So we stayed. Margaret sat back down. We had your mother in 1960. Built a life together. It was a good life, Emma. Not the life I'd dreamed of at 18. But a good life nonetheless. Thomas was a wonderful father. A steady husband. We were content. She smiled sadly. I thought I'd made peace with it all. Thought I'd locked away that part of myself. The Miller house was sold to a distant cousin of the family. Someone who never lived there. It fell into disrepair. Became the neighborhood's haunted house. And I trained myself not to look at it. Not to think about it. Not to remember. Her expression changed. Darkened. But then Thomas died. Heart attack. Sudden. 15 years ago. I was 69 years old. And suddenly I was alone with my thoughts again. Margaret's voice dropped. That Halloween 2003. I couldn't bring myself to hand out candy. Couldn't pretend to be cheerful. I sat in this chair, right here. With all the lights off. Waiting for the night to end. She looked directly at Emma. And that's when I saw it. The Miller house. Dark for 50 years. Every window suddenly blazing with light. Emma's eyes widened. I thought I was seeing things, Margaret continued. Thought grief was playing tricks on me. But the lights were real. First floor, second floor, and then, just before midnight, the attic window. That pale, steady light. The room James had been building for me. Her hands gripped the arms of the chair. I stood at this window for hours, staring at that house, at those lights. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd collapse. I grabbed the key from my drawer, put on my coat, stood at my front door with my hand on the knob. Margaret's voice shook, but I couldn't do it. Couldn't walk those 3 houses. Couldn't open that door. Couldn't face whatever was waiting in that attic. What if it was nothing? What if the lights were just old wiring? What if I opened that door and found the room empty? Then I'd lose him all over again. The last piece of him I had hoped would be gone. She looked down. So I stayed home. Like a coward. I watched from my window until dawn. Until the lights went out. And then I closed my curtains and cried. The next year, Margaret said, Halloween came again. I told myself I wouldn't look. Wouldn't torture myself. But at sunset, I found myself at the window. And right on schedule, the lights began to turn on. Emma leaned forward. It happened every year, Margaret whispered. Every single Halloween for 20 years. The same pattern. First floor at sunset. Second floor an hour later. Attic at midnight. Lights burning until dawn. And every year, I stood at this window. Watching. Wondering. Too afraid to cross that distance. She looked at Emma with eyes full of regret. Do you know what the worst part was? Not knowing. Not knowing who was turning on those lights. Not knowing what James had built for me in that attic. Not knowing if going there would give me peace. Or destroy me completely. Margaret reached out and took Emma's hand. I've spent 20 Halloweens standing at this window. 20 years of lights. 20 years of wondering. 20 years of being too much of a coward. To walk 3 houses down. And finally keep the promise I made 70 years ago. Her voice broke. I've wasted so much time, Emma. So much time afraid. So much time letting fear win. And tonight I thought would be the same. Just another Halloween. Just another night of lights and longing. And staying safely in my house. She looked at her granddaughter. But then you came home. And you went to that house. And you found that letter. The letter James wrote 70 years ago. The letter that somehow, impossibly, was waiting for me tonight. Margaret stood up, walked to her dresser, opened the bottom drawer. She pulled out a small wooden box, worn smooth by decades of handling. She opened it. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a brass skeleton key. Still shining. Still waiting. He said this opens our future, Margaret whispered. 70 years ago, he said that. And I've kept it all this time. Close to my heart. Like he asked. She held the key up to the light. I don't know who's been turning on those lights, Emma. I don't know how that letter appeared tonight. I don't know what I'll find in that attic. But I think, her voice caught. I think it's time I finally found out. Emma stood up quickly, grabbed her grandmother's hand. Then let's go, she said firmly. Right now. Together. Margaret looked at her granddaughter. At the determination in her young face. At the courage she herself had lost somewhere along the way. "It's almost midnight," Emma continued. "The attic light will come on soon. This is your chance, Grandma. Our chance. Don't wait another year. Don't wait another day. Let's go now." Margaret looked at the key in her hand. At the window. At the granddaughter who was refusing to let her be afraid anymore. She took a deep breath. "All right," she whispered. "All right. Let's go." They walked to the window together. Looked out at Maple Street. And there, at the end of the block, the Miller house blazed with light. Every window glowing. Waiting. The clock on the mantel began to chime. 11 o'clock. 1 hour until midnight. 1 hour until the attic light. Margaret put the key on its chain. Hung it around her neck. Where it had always belonged. "I'm coming, James," she whispered. "I'm finally coming." The door swung open fully. And there, standing in the golden light, was a man. Not James. Margaret knew immediately. Her heart had leapt for one impossible moment. Then settled back into reality. Not James. But someone familiar. Someone she'd known a lifetime ago. The man was old. Ancient, almost. Bent with the weight of 91 years. His face was lined deep with time. His hair pure white. His hands gnarled and spotted. He leaned heavily on a cane. His shoulders stooped. But his eyes were sharp, alert. And when they looked at Margaret, they filled with something like relief. Margaret stared, her mind working, trying to place him, trying to remember. And then, "Bobby?" she whispered. The old man smiled. And in that smile, she saw the young man he'd been. 23 years old. James's older brother. The one who'd stood beside her at the funeral. Who'd helped carry the casket. Who'd squeezed her hand and told her, "He loved you more than anything." "Hello, Margaret," Robert Miller said softly. "I wondered if you would remember me." Margaret's hand went to her chest. Her legs felt weak. "Bobby," she said again. Unable to believe it. "Bobby Miller. I thought you were dead?" Robert finished gently. "I know. Most people do. I've been quiet for a very long time." Emma stepped forward protectively. Put her arm around her grandmother. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Robert's eyes shifted to Emma. He smiled again. "You must be the granddaughter," he said. "You have Margaret's eyes. And her courage, I suspect." He stepped back from the doorway. Gestured with his cane. "Please," he said. "Come in. I've been waiting a very long time for this conversation." Margaret and Emma exchanged glances. A silent conversation. Are we safe? Should we trust him? But something in Robert's face. The gentleness there. The sadness. The weight of decades carried alone. Margaret nodded. They stepped inside. The house was exactly as Emma had imagined. And nothing like it. The entryway was clean, not dusty or cobwebbed. The hardwood floors were polished. The banister gleaming. Furniture sat under sheets, yes. But neat sheets. White and crisp. This wasn't an abandoned house. This was a maintained house. A house someone lived in. Or at least visited regularly. Photographs lined the walls of the hallway. Black and white. Family portraits spanning decades. Emma saw them as they walked. A young couple, stern-faced, 1890s clothing. James's grandparents, probably. A family of 5, early 1900s. Growing children through the years. And then, there. A photograph in a place of honor. Larger than the others. In a silver frame. James Miller in his uniform. 21 years old. Smiling. Forever young. Margaret stopped. Stared at the photograph. Her hand reached out. Touched the glass. "Hello, my love," she whispered. Robert had moved to the living room. Waiting for them. Giving Margaret her moment. Finally, she tore her eyes away. Followed Emma into the room. The living room was like stepping back in time. Furniture from the 1950s. A radio console in the corner. Doilies on the armrests. A clock ticking on the mantel. Robert had lowered himself into an armchair. His movements slow and careful. The movements of a man whose body had betrayed him, but whose mind remained sharp. Margaret and Emma sat on the sofa. Still holding hands. Still processing. For a long moment, no one spoke. The house settled around them. Old wood creaking. The wind outside. The steady tick of the clock. Finally, Robert spoke. "I moved back here 20 years ago," he said. "After my wife Martha passed. We'd lived in Boston for 50 years. Raised our children there. Built a life there. But when she died," he looked around the room, "I wanted to come home. Back to this house. Back to the memories. Back to my brother." Margaret's eyes were fixed on him. "You've been living here?" she asked. "All this time?" Robert nodded. "Not full-time. I'm in a care facility most of the year now. My children insisted. But every October, they let me come back. For the month. To be here. To keep my promise." "What promise?" Emma asked. Robert's eyes shifted to her. Then back to Margaret. "The promise I made to James," he said quietly. "The last promise I ever made to my little brother." Robert reached into his pocket slowly. Pulled out a letter. Not the one Emma had found. A different one. Just as old. Just as fragile. "This arrived 3 days after the telegram," he said. 3 days after we learned James was dead. Dated October 25, 1953. 6 days before Halloween. 4 days before he died. He held it carefully, as if it might dissolve. "He knew," Robert said simply. Somehow, he knew he wasn't coming home. His unit was being sent into heavy combat. The odds weren't good. So he wrote this. To me. His final letter home. Margaret's hands clenched in her lap. Robert looked at the letter. At his brother's handwriting. At words he'd read 1,000 times. But still couldn't fully accept. "He asked me to do something," Robert continued. "Something I've spent 70 years trying to honor." He looked up at Margaret. He asked me to watch over you. Not to interfere. Not to burden you. Just to watch. To make sure you were all right. To make sure you found happiness. Even if it was happiness without him. Margaret's breath caught. He wrote, "Bobby, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And Margaret, my beautiful Margaret. She's going to be devastated. She's going to want to die too. But she can't. She has to live. She has to love again. She has to have the life we planned. Even if I'm not there to give it to her." Robert's voice shook. "He made me promise. Promise that I wouldn't tell you about this letter. Promise that I wouldn't make you feel guilty for moving on. Promise that I would let you heal. Let you marry someone else. Let you have children. Let you be happy." Tears streamed down Margaret's face. He said, "Don't let her wait for me, Bobby. Don't let her waste her life on a ghost. I love her too much for that. I want her to be happy. That's all I've ever wanted." Robert carefully refolded the letter. Put it back in his pocket. "So I kept that promise," he said. "I watched from a distance. I saw you marry Thomas Davies. A good man. A kind man. I was glad. James would have been glad." He looked at Margaret with ancient eyes. "I saw you have a daughter. Build a life. And I stayed away. Because that's what James wanted. He didn't want his memory to be a burden. He wanted you free. But when Martha died," Robert continued, "when I came back to this house, I felt him everywhere. His presence. His love. His unfinished promises." He gestured around the room. "This house was supposed to be yours, Margaret. His father had deeded it to him. James was going to bring you here as his bride. You were going to fill it with children and laughter and life. That was the dream." Robert's voice dropped. "And I couldn't bear the thought of that dream being completely forgotten. So I started a tradition. Every Halloween, your night, his night, the night you made your promises, I light up the house." Margaret understood now. "The lights," she whispered. Robert nodded. "Every Halloween for 20 years. I come here. I open the house. I turn on every light. Room by room. The way James would have done. If he'd been waiting for you to come home. First floor at sunset. Second floor as night falls. And at midnight, the attic." He looked toward the ceiling. Toward the second floor. Toward the room above. "The attic was his special project," Robert said. "He worked on it for 2 years. Every time he came home from college. Every weekend. Every holiday. Building something for you. Something he never got to show you." Margaret's hand went to the key around her neck. "I never went in there," Robert said. "In 70 years, I've never opened that door. That room was his gift to you. Not mine to see. Not mine to share. I light the lamp that sits by the door. But I never cross the threshold." Emma leaned forward. "But the letter," she said. "The one on the porch tonight. You said you didn't put it there." Robert's brow furrowed. "What letter?" Emma pulled it out. Showed him. The envelope addressed to Margaret Sullivan. Dated October 31, 1953. Robert's face went pale. His hands trembled as he took it. stared at it. This is. His voice failed him. This is James's handwriting. He looked at Margaret. Where did you get this? On your porch, Emma said. Tonight. About an hour ago. With a bag of old candies. Robert shook his head slowly. I didn't put this here, he said. I've never seen this letter. James must have written it separately. Must have mailed it. But it never. He stopped. Looked at the envelope more closely. There's no postmark, he said. No stamp cancellation. This was never mailed. This was hand-delivered. The three of them sat in silence, processing the impossibility of it. A letter written 70 years ago. Never mailed. Never delivered. Appearing tonight. On this Halloween. The night Margaret finally found the courage to come. I don't understand, Margaret whispered. Robert looked at her, and in his eyes was something like wonder. Maybe you're not supposed to understand, he said softly. Maybe some things transcend explanation. Maybe love, real love, finds a way, even across time, even across death. He stood slowly, using his cane for support. Margaret, he said. James left you something in that attic. I don't know what it is. But I know he spent 2 years building it. I know he loved you more than life itself. And I know he wanted you to see it. He held out his hand, gesturing toward the stairs. The key you have. It fits the attic door. It's time. After 70 years. It's time you saw what he built for you. Margaret stood on shaking legs. Emma rose with her, supporting her, always supporting her. Robert led them to the stairs. His progress was slow, each step an effort, but determined. They climbed, Margaret in the middle, Emma behind her, Robert in front, leading the way. The second floor was the same as the first. Preserved, clean, waiting, bedrooms with doors closed, a bathroom with fixtures from another era. And at the end of the hall, a narrow door, different from the others, older, with a keyhole designed for an ornate skeleton key. Robert stopped in front of it. Stepped aside. This is as far as I go, he said. This is yours, Margaret. Yours and James's. I have no place here. Margaret stared at the door. This door. The one that had haunted her dreams for 70 years. The one she'd been too afraid to imagine. The one that held James's final promise. Her hand went to the key. Lifted it from around her neck. It was warm. As if it had been waiting. As if it knew. Emma squeezed her other hand. I'm right here, she whispered. Right here with you. Margaret nodded. Stepped forward. Raised the key to the lock. It slid in perfectly. As smooth as if it had been oiled yesterday. As if 70 years hadn't passed. As if time had no meaning here. She turned the key. The lock clicked. The sound impossibly loud in the quiet hallway. Margaret's hand touched the doorknob. Turned it. Pushed. The door swung open. And warm light spilled out. Golden. Welcoming. Like coming home. The attic was perfect. Not dusty. Not filled with boxes and forgotten things. Not the abandoned space of an empty house. Perfect. As if James had finished it yesterday. As if he'd been waiting here. as if 70 years had never passed. The wooden floor was polished smooth, gleaming in the lamplight. The walls were painted a soft cream. Warm. Inviting. The ceiling sloped with the roofline, but it didn't feel cramped. It felt cozy. Like a secret place. Like a sanctuary. Margaret stepped inside, her legs trembling. Emma followed. Robert remained at the threshold, keeping his promise. This was not his moment. Against one wall stood a writing desk. Simple but beautiful. Oak, hand-carved. A lamp beside it. The source of the light they'd seen from the street. The light that had burned for 20 Halloweens. On the desk, a stack of letters, tied with a red ribbon that had faded to pink. Dozens of them, maybe more. Margaret approached slowly, touched the top envelope. Her name written in James's careful hand. Margaret Sullivan. She picked up the stack. They were heavy. Full of words. Words he'd written. Words he'd never sent. His letters, she whispered. Emma came to her side. Looked at the dates on the envelopes. August 1953. September 1953. October 1953. The final one dated October 28, 3 days before Halloween. 1 day before he died. He was writing to you, Emma said softly. Even when he couldn't send them. He was still writing to you. Margaret held the letters to her chest. Felt the weight of his love. Still here. Still present. Still alive in paper and ink. She turned. Looked at the walls. They were covered with photographs, all the ones she remembered. Their summer together. Their autumn. Their promises. James and Margaret at the carnival. James and Margaret by the lake. James and Margaret on this very porch. Young and smiling. Forever captured. Forever young. But between the photographs, sketches, pencil drawings, James's hand, his vision. Margaret stepped closer. The first drawing showed a woman in a wedding dress standing in a garden. The details were exquisite. The lace. The flowers in her hair. Her face. Margaret's face. As James had imagined her on their wedding day. The next drawing showed a nursery, a crib by a window. Sunlight streaming in. A rocking chair in the corner, mobile hanging from the ceiling. Stars and moons. Another drawing. 2 children. A boy and a girl, playing in a yard. James's imagination of the family they'd have. And finally, the last drawing made Margaret's breath catch. 2 figures on a porch swing. Old. Gray-haired. Holding hands. The man's profile was James. The woman's was Margaret. As they would have been if time had been kind. If war hadn't come. If promises had been kept. Beneath it, written in James's hand. Our forever. Margaret touched the drawing. Her fingers traced the pencil lines. The future they'd never lived. The life that existed only on paper and in her heart. On the desk, propped against the stack of letters, was a note card. Margaret hadn't seen it at first, but now Emma picked it up. Brought it to her. Margaret unfolded it with shaking hands. James's handwriting. One final message. My dearest Margaret, this room is my promise to you. Whether I am there or not. Whether we grow old together, or you grow old without me. Know that I built this for you. This chair for you to rock our children. Or to rock yourself when you need peace. These walls to hold our memories, the ones we made, the ones we dreamed of. This room to be our forever, even if forever looks different than we planned. Live here, or don't. Open these letters, or keep them sealed. But know that you were loved, Margaret. You were loved completely. You were loved forever. And you always will be. Your James. Margaret read the note 3 times, her tears falling onto the paper, smudging the ink. But she didn't care. She rocked in the chair. Back and forth. Back and forth. The rhythm soothing. The motion bringing a peace she hadn't felt in 70 years. Emma knelt beside her, put her head on her grandmother's lap, the way she had as a child. Margaret stroked her granddaughter's hair, rocked, and wept. But these weren't tears of grief. Not anymore. These were tears of release, of healing. Of finally coming home. Robert stood in the doorway, his own eyes wet. He loved you so much, he said quietly. More than I understood then, more than I can comprehend even now. To build this, to leave this, to love someone so completely, that even death couldn't stop him from keeping his promise. Margaret looked up at him. "Thank you, Bobby," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for keeping his memory alive. For lighting these lights. For watching over this room. For waiting." Robert nodded. "It was my honor," he said simply. "My brother loved you. And I loved him. It was the least I could do." He looked around the room one last time. "I think I can rest now," he said softly. "I think we both can. The promise is kept. You're here. You've seen what he built. His love has finally reached you." They stayed in that attic room until dawn. Margaret rocked in her chair. Emma beside her. Robert in a corner. 3 generations connected by a love that transcended time. Margaret read some of James's letters, not all. Some she would save. To read slowly. To savor. To carry her through whatever time she had left. But the ones she read, they were full of love. Of longing. Of hope even in the darkest places. Of a boy who'd loved a girl so much that not even war could diminish it. The last letter, dated October 28, said simply, "I don't know what tomorrow brings, but I know I loved you today. And yesterday. And every day before. And I will love you in whatever comes after. Wait for me or don't. Love again or don't. But know you were loved. Completely. Forever. J." As the sun began to rise, painting the sky pink and gold, the lamp on the desk flickered. And went out. Not from loss of power, but from completion. From release. From a vigil that had lasted 20 years. And was finally done. Margaret stood, walked to the window, looked out at Maple Street. At the world that had changed so much. At the town that had moved on. At the life that had continued without James. But here, in this room, he was still present. Still loving her. Still keeping his promise. "I'm here, James," she whispered. "I'm finally here. And I understand now. You never left me. You've been waiting. In this room. In these letters. In this chair. In the light, she turned back to Emma and Robert. "Let's go home," she said. But she knew she'd be back. This room was hers now. As it had always been meant to be. A place to come. To remember. To heal. To feel close to the boy who'd loved her. To the promise that had never died. 1 year later, Halloween night, Margaret stood on the porch of the Miller house, Emma beside her, Robert in his chair, wrapped in a blanket. His health was failing, but he'd insisted on being here. One more Halloween. One more night of lights. They handed out candy together to pirates and princesses, to superheroes and monsters, to children who no longer feared this house because it wasn't a haunted house anymore. It was a love story, a testament, a reminder that some promises can't be broken, even by death. The candy they gave out. Vintage candies in paper bags, strawberry bonbons, peppermint sticks, root beer barrels, the same candies from 1952, from 1953, from every Halloween James and Margaret had shared. Parents smiled, asked about the history. Margaret would tell them, sometimes. About the boy who'd gone to war. About the promise he'd kept. About the room he'd built. About love that waited 70 years as the last trick-or-treater left. As the street grew quiet, Margaret and Emma climbed to the attic. Together, they lit the lamp. Not as a vigil this time. Not as a beacon of longing. But as a celebration, a remembrance, a way of saying, we remember, we honor, we love. The light burned in the attic window, warm and steady, visible from the street. A new tradition now. Margaret's tradition. She sat in her chair. The chair James had made. Emma sat at her feet. And Margaret read aloud from one of the letters, her voice carrying James's words, his love, his dreams, bringing him to life again. If only for a moment, if only in memory. But isn't that what love does? Transcend time? Transcend death? Transcend even the boundaries between what was and what might have been. Margaret looked out the window. At Maple Street. At the oak tree where their initials still lived. MS plus JM. Forever. And she smiled. Not with sadness. Not with regret. But with gratitude. Grateful for the love she'd known. Grateful for the life she'd lived. Grateful for the promise that had finally been kept. "Thank you for waiting, James," she whispered. To the room. To the chair. To the letters. To the love that filled this space. Thank you for the light. And in that attic room, surrounded by photographs and sketches, by letters and memories, by a chair that rocked with perfect balance, by a love that had never died, Margaret finally found her peace. The light in the empty house was no longer empty. It was full. Full of love. Full of memory. Full of promise kept. Some loves never die. They wait. They endure. They burn bright in attic windows on Halloween nights, patient and constant, until the moment when past and present finally meet. When promises made in youth are kept in age. When the light that was meant to guide someone home finally succeeds. The Miller house stood on Maple Street. No longer empty. No longer feared. No longer forgotten. It stood as a testament to love, to patience, to promises kept across time. And every Halloween, when the light burned in the attic window, people would stop, look up, and remember that love, real love, never truly ends. It just waits in the light.